I've been asked to write a book gathering together my columns of my travel journals. It's no small exaggeration to say that Ecuador has been inundated with Venezuelans over the last few years. They work in the shops, restaurants, sell cigarettes and candy in the streets, and work in the hospitals and teach in the schools. They're doing construction on the roof, so that's the sound you hear. They are literally everywhere, enriching the culture of Ecuador as hardworking, friendly, positive people, dynamic people, combining Andean and Caribbean culture. They overwhelmingly seem anxious to get along, and their presence increases the population of Ecuador noticeably and dramatically, like Mexicans in the U.S. And I've been told that Venezuela now more resembles ghost towns because so many people have left. Okay? It's not, the situation is not helped by U.S. policy. U.S. should be trying to be a good example and not doing economic blockades. Just like they made the situation in Cuba worse by their terrorism. But how do you know who is from where? My American friends might ask. It's easy to identify Venezuelans. You wouldn't ask that question if you lived in Ecuador. As soon as they open their mouths, it is a giveaway. Their Spanish accent is unique. There's also a dark side to the economic crisis that left Venezuela's economy in shambles and a de facto dollarization, but with little dollars to go around. De facto dollarization with little dollars to go around. Entire families living on the street corners of Ecuador's cities. Husbands and wives begging for money in intersections, or working, as they call it, selling candy, and mothers with babies holding their hands with palms open. Many of the Venezuelans collaborate together on rooms where they live in crowded spaces. There has also been an exodus of Venezuela's professional class, especially doctors, leaving the hospitals in their home country for the most part empty. What is true for Ecuador in terms of mass migration, as well as immigration, remember, there's a difference, so it's not true when they say that Trump is against immigrants. He wants to stop illegal migration. And now the Democrats have closed all the borders of the U.S. So how does that really work? Criticize Trump for wanting to do it, and then they go ahead and close it in the name of the public health circus. So what's true for Ecuador in terms of mass migration as well as immigration is also true for Colombia and Peru. These countries have also been saturated with Venezuelans. I'm pro-Venezuelans, and so I prefer to say our culture here has been enriched, although one Ecuadorian man told me that the quintessential Ecuadorian Spanish is going to disappear with time because of the migration. South America is multicultural and has always been a melting pot. In Lima, Peru, for example, there are a lot of Chinese immigrants and Chinese restaurants. And you can hear the indigenous languages on the streets, mostly Quechua, of all the cities in Ecuador, but mostly the mountain cities. Jose came to Ecuador 1 year ago with his wife Maria and their 2 young children. They were from Caracas, Venezuela. During the last 2 months, I've gotten to know Jose. He and his wife, with babes in arms, sell candy and cigarettes. The classroom this year has been replaced by the street corner as a place where I spend my time. I will not say the park because most of the parks are closed. The few that remain open as a result become more crowded than ever. Because we have this situation in the world now. As an English teacher in the year 2020, I have not been allowed to practice my profession. Social distancing is the new name of the game. Overnight, everything changed. Because it is impossible to teach classes while observing social distancing, being an English teacher this year is an outdated profession with a new normal. Similar to a stagecoach driver, a blacksmith, or an analog photography developer. You could be a really good stagecoach driver, but the answer will always be your services are not needed. Unable to pay my rent without a source of income coming in, I have spent the last 6 months sleeping on the floor of the classroom where I used to teach. Cutting costs. The need to pass time with other human beings is strong. It's a natural desire. This means I hang out in the parks, the very few that remain open, and the street corners, bringing me closer and closer to life on the street and to the concerns of the people who inhabit it. We came to Ecuador looking for a better life, and then the pandemic hit, Jose told me. We earned just enough to pay for our room, but for the first few months here we slept on the street. We got sick from drinking the water and had diarrhea. We did not have the means to boil it. We were robbed, he said. Sometimes our babies cry because they are hungry. We thought we were getting on our feet, and then this. In January, the president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, a former revolutionary who is wheelchair-bound, met with President Donald Trump and asked for millions of dollars in aid money to help support the Venezuelan migrant crisis. As a condition, Moreno had to arrest a journalist that had been living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and do a bunch of other stuff that seemed arbitrary at best, maybe even a little crazy. Returning to Ecuador with his suitcase full of cash, metaphorically speaking, at the point the cash went dark and never really trickled down to people like Jose and Maria and their children. During the last part of 2019, the economy of Ecuador was paralyzed by a strike, this is last year, due to the government's decision to remove a state subsidy on petrol, which made prices go through the roof. Everything was affected by the protests on price increases. This immediately put Lenin Moreno at odds with those nostalgic for the days of the former President Rafael Correa, who was beloved for his populism. The roads closed, the interprovincial buses shut down, the economy stalled. They even later put the agitators in jail who called for the stop to the economy until an amicable agreement on fuel prices could be reached. They called for a stop until an agreement could be reached. And then after the economy got back to life, then they started prosecuting them. Interesting, the current president also went on a mass prosecution of everybody connected with the former president and the former president's government. But what psychologists call projection, because so much of what he's accusing them of, without any kind of proof, he's now doing himself. And during the crisis of 2019, the end of that year, they said certain politicians were guilty of economic terrorism for contributing to the strikes, as well as company leaders. That, though, as bad as it seemed at the time in late 2019, repeated itself in the early months of 2020. Although this time it was not indigenous people and bus drivers blocking the highways, but militarized police. The actions of the strike of 2019 just repeated itself on an unimaginable scale in March of 2020. The only difference was this time it was the government of Lenin Moreno doing it, not loyalists to the former President Correa or bus drivers concerned about having to raise prices. What in 2019 had been called economic terrorism was in 2020 accepted by the overwhelmingly vast majority of the population, including all the politicians, even as militarized police went from business to business with guns, enforcing a stop to most economic activity, reminding Ecuador's old-timers to scenes of the war with Peru in the 1940s, as well as the time when all of South America had been covered by military dictatorships, curfews, and the national security state apparatus. I watched them bulldoze the street market 1 block from where I lived, where I would go every day to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. Without this shopping possibility, in Spanish called mercados informales, informal markets, I know I just butchered my R's, it meant lines for an entire block just to get into the few supermarkets still allowed to function. The parallel between the strike of 2019, called economic terrorism by the government, which saw some politicians and business leaders prosecuted, And the stop to the economy of 2020 was lost on the overwhelming vast majority of Ecuadorians, even the opposition parties, as it seemed such an example of what psychologists call projection. Virtually everybody went along with it. And I kind of had this idea that if you don't protest, then you're not allowed to complain. Or if you don't do your part to try to change things. Now the economy has started to open up again for everyone except English teachers and dance club owners, it seems. For someone like me, who loves teaching English and dancing, I find myself still just shaking my head in disbelief. The prohibitions in place, we are told, are going to last until the end of the year, justified in the name of security, health, or whatever. Next year, we don't know. As a rational man, though, I believe what is provable, and I have not seen remotely how this is justified. And for Venezuelans, it means they have left an economic basket case looking for a progressive country, only to encounter an economic nightmare.